What's up everybody, Brandon Johnson here again. And if you follow my channel, you might be aware of my guitar licks series, where I cover specific guitar licks from some of my favorite guitar players over the years. And I received a question the other day from one of my subscribers about how to use licks in your soloing. So I thought I would make a brief video kind of talking about how to use guitar licks in your soloing, what to look for, and how to use them tastefully so you're not just, copying them note for note. And the idea with a guitar lick is it kind of encapsulates the style or the approach of a specific guitar player and how they kind of think about soloing. And it's kind of a nice compact way to illustrate stylistic differences between guitar players and how they kind of approach soloing. So I think one of the main concepts when it comes to kind of using guitar licks in your soloing is thinking about the language of bluegrass. If we're talking about bluegrass soloing, there's certain things, there's certain intervals, there's certain runs that are sort of common across all styles of bluegrass soloing. And this is not unique to bluegrass music. This is something that you hear in other styles as well, in rock, blues, jazz. There's just sort of certain licks that kind of define the sound of that genre or that style of music. Some of the great guitar innovators over the years are the ones that really contributed the most to the sort of the language of their style of music. Guitar players like B.B. King, for example, really defined the sound of blues guitar. Also, Charlie Parker in the jazz world, he really kind of defined the sound of modern jazz soloing with some of his chromatic runs and kind of his approach to soloing, which has been emulated over the years. And similarly, in bluegrass guitar, you have guys like Doc Watson, Tony Rice, Norman Blake, who've really contributed to the overall language of bluegrass music, which has carried over in subsequent decades to now the modern era. So I thought today I would take a look at two of the greats, the all-time great bluegrass guitarists, Tony Rice and Doc Watson. And I thought I would look at a couple of licks from them, kind of what makes them similar and what makes them different, and how you can take these licks and use them in your soloing. So I guess we'll go in chronological order here, and we'll take a look at a lick by Doc Watson. So this is an example of a Doc Watson style lick. Now, what makes this lick unique to Doc Watson? Well, he tends to kind of play an unbroken chain of 16th notes using alternating picking. His technique was very up, down, up, down, up, down, which is known as alternating picking. And another thing that makes this a bluegrass lick is the fact that it's played out of the first position. So the first position on the guitar is kind of the first 3 frets. If you think about the G chord, we're playing this lick out of the G position. And we're playing it using kind of just those first 3 frets. There's a lot of use of open strings as well. There's a couple other things that are contained in that lick that make it bluegrass. One of those things is it starts and ends on the root note, which is the 3rd fret low E, since we're playing out of G here. So we're going to kind of start, even though it starts on the open E, it really implies that root note very heavily. And another thing that's sort of universal when it comes to bluegrass soloing, the use of the G run. So the G run is this, right, where you're actually playing this run inside of this lick. And you're going to hear certain aspects of that in this Doc Watson lick. So like the kind of the middle section of this lick, right? Right there, that's a major component of the G run. That's 2nd fret D to open G, or 2nd fret D to open D to open G. You can play that on a pull-off as well. This lick actually has the G run in it. The G run is sort of universal as a component of the language of bluegrass. It tells the listener, it indicates to the listener that this is a style of guitar playing. This is a style of music when you hear that run. And so how would you take a lick like this and use it in your soloing? Well, for me, this is actually this is an approach that I take when I'm soloing, especially if I'm soloing really, really fast. And the reason that this works when you're playing really, really fast is you can play an unbroken chain of 16th notes. And you can really focus on your attack using your alternating picking technique. So if you think about this lick here, If you have to go to a G chord, right, and you're playing really fast, this is a really good lick to use because it starts on the open E. So if you're transitioning out of a D, for example, and then you need to go to a G and play a really fast run, this is a good run to use because it uses the open E, which gives you a moment to get into your G position. And then another thing you can do is you can add in the G run at the end of this lick here. And you can sort of add that into your solo, just that basic G run, you can add that in as part of your solo. Now, you don't have to necessarily play this lick note for note. You know, it's not about, when you're soloing, it's not about nailing every single note. It's about expressing yourself through your guitar using some of these concepts that are kind of contained in this lick. These licks are sort of intended to be a practice aid, to be something that you can work on at home, and then when you're soloing in a live situation or in a performance situation, you can sort of use bits and pieces of this in your soloing. So let's talk about that a little bit. How do we use, you know, bits and pieces of this run so that we're not just copying it note for note? Well, let's take a look at this. So if you look at kind of the middle of this run here, we have an open G, 2nd fret G, 3rd fret G, 2nd fret G, open G. So that's something that I use a lot in my soloing, just those kind of 5 notes there. And what you can do is you can repeat that. This is an idea called phrasing. So the way I might use this is I might just play that little 5-note cluster on repeat. So there what I did is I just repeated this a couple times. In my mind, I'm sort of getting my bearings in the song. I'm thinking about the tempo. I'm thinking about maybe the next chord that's coming up. And then you use that as a timing mechanism so that you're not worrying so much about nailing every single note, losing track of the tempo, which is actually more important than the notes you're playing. The tempo and the timing and the groove of your playing should take precedence over, you know, nailing every note perfectly. So if you can't remember this lick note for note in a real-time musical situation, it's fine. You can just take bits and pieces of it. So right there, I just played basically the same notes out of this lick, but just in a different order. So, you know, the lick is in my mind, I remember it, but I'm not trying to play it note for note. There may be situations where I do play it note for note, but here I'm taking just components of this lick and sort of using them on the fly to create a solo. Another part of this lick you can use is the open A, 1st fret A, 2nd fret A, and then maybe that open D. So there I'm just taking those 3 notes, those 4 notes, kind of repeating them and creating a phrase out of it. This is still using just the notes from this Doc Watson lick. Hammer-ons, you can pick the notes out, you can do pull-offs, stuff like that. And you're still speaking the language of bluegrass because you're using the components of the sort of language of bluegrass. You're using the G run, notes from the G run. You're playing these out of the open position and you're kind of using open strings. So that would be an example of kind of how to use this Doc Watson lick in your soloing. Now let's shift stylistically to another guitar player, Tony Rice, and let's take a look at one of his licks. So that was a lick kind of inspired by Tony Rice. Now, what makes that lick unique and what kind of separates it from the Doc Watson lick? Well, you can see here we have much more space between the notes. So we're not using an unbroken chain of 16th notes. We're cross-picking, we're skipping over strings. At the beginning there, you can see we're hitting a G and then a 3rd fret high E, so we're skipping over that open B. And because it's Tony Rice, we're going to be using some pull-offs, some hammer-ons, and some slides, which he's kind of known for. So he's still speaking the language of bluegrass, and why is that? Why is he speaking the language of bluegrass? Well, like we mentioned before, this lick is being played out of the 1st position. It uses a lot of open strings, and it uses the notes from the G run, the famous G run, which was sort of defined early on by some of the, the originators of bluegrass music, Bill Monroe, guys like that, sort of defined this language of bluegrass, and these guys sort of added their own flavor and their own style to it. So one of the things that, one of the many things that makes Tony Rice's playing unique is he uses more of a kind of a pentatonic or a bluesy approach to his playing, sometimes crossing into almost jazz. And so here we have the open G, the 3rd fret high E. That's on an upstroke, right? And we're playing that, it's an 8th note, a dotted 8th note, so there's a bit of a gap there. And then we're moving to the 1st fret high E. And then here we have what is really one of the signatures of Tony Rice's soloing style, which is a pull-off from the 2nd fret B to the 1st fret B. So that's something that he does a lot, and it's this interval here. So he's playing a pull-off, 2nd fret B, 1st fret B, and then with the ring finger you're playing 3rd fret G, while keeping your index finger planted, playing that 1st fret B again, and then you'll see a slide there from 3rd fret G to 4th fret G to open, followed by a pull-off, 3rd fret D to open, and then again the root note at the end there, that open G. So we talked about starting and ending on the root note. So he's really speaking the exact same language, so to speak, as Doc is, although it's stylistically completely different. I mean, he's using sort of more of a pentatonic approach, he's using pull-offs, he's got gaps in between the notes. So how can we use bits and pieces of this in our soloing? Well, anytime, this is kind of how I think about it anyways, but anytime I want to solo and I want to create kind of a bluesy sound, like for example, if you're playing over a 7th chord, if you're playing over a minor chord, this type of approach would work really well for that because it's pentatonic, so it only has 5 notes, which means it's going to apply over a greater sort of context of chord changes. So if we look at kind of the latter half of this lick, you'll notice that we have notes out of the G run again. And what he's doing is instead of playing the 2nd fret D, he's playing 3rd fret D. So it'd be something like that. But it's kind of a similar concept to where, we were talking earlier about 2nd fret D to open to the G. It creates kind of more of a major sound. And Tony Rice has more of kind of a dirtier bluesy sound, so he uses 3rd fret D. We won't talk about too much of the theory about what that is exactly. We're kind of trying to keep things, somewhat basic here so that you can kind of take this into your soloing. He's still sort of speaking that same bluegrass guitar language with flavors of blues mixed in there. So one thing you could do here to kind of take this into your soloing is, you see that pull-off there, that 2nd fret B to 1st fret B pull-off. Well, you can actually start a solo with that, and that's something that I like to do a lot too, is to kind of start a solo with that little pull-off. You do something like that. So that's the pull-off, the 2nd fret B to 1st fret B, to 3rd fret D, and then 1st fret B again on an upstroke. And again, sort of like what we were doing with the Doc Watson lick, where you can kind of repeat phrases, we're kind of repeating this phrase as well. So there we're kind of creating a solo out of just a piece of this lick here. Also with the pull-off, you can kind of create a repeating phrase out of that. So your 3rd fret D to open, you can kind of use that as a little repeating phrase as well. And you can kind of combine these two licks together as well. And you can use elements of each of them together. So I'll just kind of improvise this, and I'll try to use some of the flavors from each lick. there I kind of, used some of the Tony Rice stuff first, and then I kind of moved to the Doc stuff, and then back to Tony with the slide up, and then sort of ended it with just the sort of Doc Watson style G run there at the end. So that's kind of how you can use licks in your soloing. So I would say that, you don't necessarily need to focus on playing these licks exactly as they're written, or exactly as you hear them or transcribe them yourself from these great players. Although, it's not unusual, and some of the really great musicians over the years have copied solos note for note from their heroes. So, when it comes to music, this is something that is very, very common, is playing like your heroes or trying to emulate the style of your favorite guitarist. So, there's nothing wrong with taking licks and sort of trying to use them in your soloing, because what ends up happening is, no one can play exactly like Tony Rice or exactly like Doc Watson. You are inevitably going to be adding your own flavor to what you're playing, whether you try to or not. You can try as hard as you want to sound exactly like them, and you're still going to sound like you a little bit. And that's a good thing, especially in music, because you don't want to just be a robot emulating guitar players. Really try to focus on the rhythm and the timing of the music you're playing, and then use elements of these licks that you learn and that you practice on your own time to sort of inform your soloing and to sort of inspire your soloing, and play the things that are easy for you to execute on the fly. You should just try to play the bits and pieces of it that come naturally to you. So I hope this was helpful to you. I get a lot of questions like this from people about, how do I use these licks? What am I supposed to do with this? Do I learn it note for note? Do I take bits and pieces of it? So I hope that kind of helps shed some light on that. And if you enjoyed this video, definitely give this a thumbs up and leave a comment for me and let me know what you think. Also, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It really helps me out. And head on over to the website too, brandonjohnsonguitar.com. There's a lot of great lessons on there. And I also offer a all-access membership where you can get access to every lesson I've ever made. So thanks again for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.